The fire had been dead 4 hours. The embers held no warmth. But inside the dugout, the air felt alive. Daniel Reeves woke in the pitch black, and the first thing he noticed was the absence of a shiver. He reached out and laid his palm flat against the water barrel built into the wall.
Still warm. The fire's been out since midnight. How is this possible?
Outside, the January ice groaned on the river. Inside, the dugout held its heat like a stubborn secret. 3 months earlier, Daniel had been a man with a shovel and a reason no one understood.
He had watched his father die in a cabin full of firewood. The cold took him anyway.
His brother-in-law, Mark Harlow, appeared on the riverbank with a scowl and an opinion.
You really think digging a cave in a riverbank is wise? What about floods?
The river's been low 5 years. I'll take that chance.
He went back to work, his shovel shaping the earth into tidy rectangular niches.
Timber heat fades in hours. Water holds it like a bank holds gold. I am lining this wall with barrels.
Water barrels inside a dirt hole? You are not building a shelter, Daniel. You are digging a wet grave.
Call it what you want. I've slept in cold that turned breath to ice. I'll try anything else.
The words were loaded with a memory he rarely spoke of. His father's frozen body found beside a stove still full of wood.
He had all the fuel in the world. But heat vanishes if you can't hold it still. A short fire heats the water. Then I let it die. The barrels give back heat for 8 hours. No waking up to frost on the blankets.
8 hours. And then you are frozen again. I'll stick to firewood, even if it means stoking a stove all night.
You've never watched a man freeze while the logs crackled 3 feet away.
By nightfall, the earthen wall held 5 perfect alcoves, waiting to be filled with something no neighbor yet understood. The next morning, he rolled the first heavy barrel down the slope, its weight carving a furrow in the mud. Inside the dugout, he muscled the barrel into the first niche, packing wet clay around it until the wood vanished.
Tight enough to hold heat, tight enough to keep the water in place for months.
He carried bucket after bucket from the river, filling each barrel to the brim before hammering the wooden plug shut. Mark came by one last time before the freeze, standing in the entrance with his arms crossed and his jaw set.
You are really going through with this? 5 buried barrels won't change the laws of winter.
I am not trying to change laws, I'm using them. Water holds heat, 5 times longer than stone.
The dog curled on its pallet, unbothered by the argument, already trusting the shelter more than any man did.
Well, I hope your physics hold, because if that river ever rises, this hole becomes a coffin.
Let the cold come first. One problem at a time.
The first snow fell silent and heavy, erasing the riverbank in a single afternoon. Daniel hauled split oak inside, stacking it near the cold hearth, his breath already visible in the lantern light. He knelt in front of the barrel wall and struck the flint. The tinder caught, and the fire rose.
Heat the water now, and it'll give back every degree through the darkest hours.
He fed the flames just long enough to warm the barrel surfaces, then let the fire collapse into embers. Hours later, the air inside felt the same as when the fire had been roaring.
Warm, not just survivable, comfortable. The water worked.
He checked the thermometer hanging on the wall, 50 degrees. While outside, the world was frozen solid. Outside, the frozen dawn turned his breath to crystals the moment he stepped out. The river was a sheet of white.
One night down, but winter's only just begun.
Week after week, the cold tightened its grip. Daniel's ritual became as fixed as the sunrise, a brief fire, then silent heat. A mile away, Mark Harlow woke every 2 hours to feed his stove. The woodpile shrank faster than the moon.
If I stop chopping for one day, the pipes freeze. This is no way to live.
Old Caleb Thompson's well froze solid the first week of December. He had to melt snow for coffee. But inside the dugout, the dog lapped liquid water from a bowl beside the warm barrels.
The river's solid. I've got maybe 2 days of water in the canteen.
He twisted the spigot on the nearest barrel, and clear water splashed into his tin cup.
The barrels, they're not just a heater. They're a reservoir. Liquid water when everything else is frozen solid.
He screwed the spigot shut, a hard silence settling over the discovery. No one could know yet. Outside, Mark's axe split ice in the dark, each swing a marker of hours Daniel no longer counted. Old Caleb Thompson stumbled into the dugout, ice cracking from his beard, and stopped dead at the warmth.
Good Lord, Daniel. It's like springtime in here. How are you not frozen solid like the rest of us?
Water barrels in the wall, Caleb. They hold the heat long after the fire's out. Come see for yourself.
He guided the old man to the barrel wall, where he twisted a brass spigot. Clear water poured into the tin cup. No ice, no slush, just cold liquid defying the winter outside.
You've got water too? While every well for miles is solid ice? How is this possible?
The earth insulates them, same as it holds the heat. The water never drops below freezing down here.
If word gets out, you'll have every frozen soul in the valley at your door.
Then they'll find a door that opens. Nobody freezes alone if I can help it.
Thompson left with a full bucket and a heavier secret in his chest. Glancing back at the earthen mound, the axe came down hard, shattering the ice in the bucket into a spray of cold splinters. Inside, his wife's voice cut sharper than the wind. You'd rather let our children go thirsty than knock on your own brother-in-law's door.
I'll die before I beg from a man who buried himself in the mud.
A mile away, the dog lapped water from a full bowl, the barrel beside it radiating steady warmth.
The children's lips are cracking. The cow hasn't produced milk in 2 days. This isn't about pride anymore.
His knuckles went white around the axe handle. Then, slowly, he set it down.
Maybe that hole in the riverbank is the only place within 10 miles with a drop of liquid water.
He snatched up the empty bucket and stepped into the bitter wind without a word to his wife. The path to the dugout had vanished under the drifts, but he forced his boots through, each step a fight against his own stubbornness. The earthen mound emerged from the white, its chimney breathing steam like a sleeping animal, and the last thing Mark wanted to face. Mark pushed the heavy hide aside, and the warmth seized him, a summer afternoon smell in the frozen dead of winter.
I didn't think you'd still be breathing in here. The whole valley is frozen solid, and you are sitting here like it's June.
Breathing, warm, and with water to spare. You look like you've been chewing ice. Give me the bucket.
He opened the spigot. Water splashed into the bucket. No ice, no slush, only the sound of plenty. Mark drank 3 full ladles, then set the cup down, his eyes fixed on the barrel as if it might speak.
How is this possible? Every stream for miles is solid stone.
Water holds heat 5 times longer than stone. Buried here, it never drops below freezing, same as in a deep well.
Mark laid a hand on the barrel, feeling the faint warmth. The skepticism in his face cracked, just slightly.
It's not a grave, I'll say that. But the river, I still see it rising.
He straightened, the full bucket heavy in his grip. He'd taken the water and the warmth, but he hadn't taken back the warning. The thaw came sudden. Water dripped from the dugout roof, and the river's voice changed from silence to a low growl. Daniel stood on the bank and watched the water climb half an inch by noon, the ice sheets cracking like broken bone. Old Caleb Thompson had warned him that morning. The deep snow on the ridges would melt fast, and the river would remember its old channel. Mark appeared just as the first real rain began to fall, his boots sinking in the softening earth, his face tight.
You see it now, don't you? That river's going to swell. My wet grave isn't a joke anymore.
I see it. But the barrels might do more than hold heat. They could hold back water.
He knelt by his work table and sketched a rough plan. The 5 barrels repositioned at the entrance, a barrier of buoyancy.
Water pushes in. The barrels rise against each other. They lock into place like a dam. The same thing that stores heat can block a flood.
You've got a lot of faith in physics.
Better than faith in a flood that hasn't come, Daniel replied, and kept drawing lines that could one day hold back a river. Daniel traced the lines on the paper again. The barrels are sealed tight. When water presses, they'll lift slightly, wedging against each other.
That's your plan. Floating wood against a flood. You'd trust buoyancy over sandbags.
Buoyancy doesn't tire. It doesn't soak through. It just rises with the pressure.
Mark stared at the sketch, then at the river chewing at the bank. His jaw worked, grinding down the last of his doubt.
Fine, I'll help, but if this fails, we're both swimming.
Daniel didn't answer. He was already at the first barrel, prying it from the earthen wall with a crowbar. Together they rolled it across the dirt floor, mud squelching under the weight. The entrance was 10 feet away and closing fast. They set the first barrel crosswise in the entrance, packing clay around the base. 1 down, 4 to go.
How do we know it won't just float away when the water hits?
Because the water will push it into the frame, not out. That's the whole point.
The rain thickened into a gray curtain, and the river rose faster than a man could measure. They heaved the second barrel into place, mud sucking at their boots. The third barrel jammed, and Mark cursed the fitting.
It's too wide. The frame's warped from the frost.
Daniel threw his shoulder against the wood. It screeched into the gap, and they packed the seams with handfuls of wet clay.
The river's up 2 feet in an hour. You haven't got much time.
Mark drove the wooden plug into the 4th barrel with 3 blows of the mallet. Each strike sent a flat echo through the half-sealed entrance.
Last one. Get it up against the frame.
They wrestled the final barrel into position, and Daniel jammed the spigot tight. Water was already sliding under it. A thin jet hissed through a crack near the bottom. Daniel dropped to his knees and pressed mud into the leak with his bare fingers. Outside, the river slapped against the barrier. Inside, the space held its breath. The flood had arrived. The water pressed against the wooden wall, and the barrels groaned like living things shifting in their sleep. A thin spray shot through a seam Daniel missed. He plugged it with a fistful of clay, and the hissing stopped.
It's working. The water pressure is forcing the barrels tighter. They're locking, just like I drew.
It's bulging. The whole wall is moving.
Daniel climbed onto a crate and pressed his ear against the top barrel. The vibration was steady, not violent.
It's not cracking. It's just settling. The buoyancy is doing what it's supposed to.
He's insane, but maybe insane enough to be right.
They sat with their backs against the damp wood, listening to the flood roar 6 inches away. Every now and then, the barrier shifted a fraction, creaking like a ship hull, but the seams held. Outside, the river climbed higher. Inside, the dugout remained dry, clinging to a physics that Mark still couldn't quite trust. Darkness swallowed the hours. The only company, the lantern's shiver and the river's unending assault on the wood. The dog never stirred. It lay curled on its pallet, breathing slow, utterly unbothered by the chaos 6 inches away.
I called it a wet grave. I was wrong. You built a dam out of water and wood, and it's holding.
You weren't wrong to be afraid. The fear made me think. That's why it's holding.
Mark exhaled, a breath he'd held since the rain began. It fogged in the lantern light, and for the first time, it wasn't from terror. They didn't speak again for a long while. The only voice was the river, and slowly, Even that began to change. The roar dulled. The pounding against the barrier eased into a rhythmic lap. Then, a whisper.
It's dropping. The flood is dropping.
Daniel pressed his palm flat against the barrel. The vibration had settled. The pressure was releasing its grip. By dawn's first gray light through the chimney, the silence had become more than absence of noise. It was the shape of one ground. They shouldered the hide aside, and gray light flooded the dugout for the first time in 12 hours. The barrel dam stood exactly where they'd built it, caked in brown silt but solid as a fortress gate.
It held. Every seam, every joint, just like the sketch.
Mark touched a barrel, his hand leaving a print on the wet wood. His mouth opened, but no sound came. Outside, the river had dropped 3 feet, leaving a ribbon of scoured mud where the flood had tried to break in.
You knew it would hold. All night. You never doubted. I'll never doubt you again, Daniel. Your wet grave saved everything.
They stood in the silence of a world remade by water, the dugout a dry cave in the middle of it all. Beyond the dam, the river flowed back within its banks, chastened. Inside, the dugout was bone dry. Mark took a long breath of rain-washed air, the kind a man takes when he's finally stopped waiting for the next blow. Voices carried across the mudflat. Caleb Thompson rounded the bend with a knot of neighbors, their faces braced for grief.
We saw the river over its banks. We were sure the dugout had flooded. How are you standing here dry?
The water barrels. We moved them to the entrance and they locked into a dam.
A grizzled farmer stepped forward, squinting at the silt-streaked barrels. He laid a hand on the wood, then turned to face the silent crowd. Someone muttered about beavers, about mad genius. The words were shaky, but no longer mocking.
I called it a wet grave. I was the fool. This man buried water and built a wall that saved us.
Thompson stared from the dam to Daniel, then back to the dam. He shook his head like a man seeing a miracle.
You kept the water from freezing. Then you made it hold back a flood. What else can those barrels do?
Whatever we need them to, that's the point.
The neighbors stood in the mud, the dugout behind them, like a sermon nobody had asked to hear. But the lesson had already been learned. When the last neighbor trudged away, Mark remained, his boots planted in the mud, his jaw working around words he'd never said.
I need to say something, Daniel. From the first day, I treated this like a fool's project. I called it a wet grave, and instead it held back a wall of water and kept us alive. I was wrong about everything.
You weren't wrong about everything. You were right about the flood. Without your warning, I might not have planned for it.
The admission hung between them like a truce flag. Then Daniel extended his hand, muddy and calloused, across the space that had held so much ice.
All those months I spent mocking him, and he never once threw it back at me.
Mark took the hand, and the grip was not a formality. It was the collapse of a wall neither of them had built consciously.
From now on, if you are building something, I'll carry the wood.
Good, because I've got more ideas.
The dog barked once, and beyond the barrels, the river ran clear and shallow, as if it, too, had learned its lesson. 3 days later, the river ran silver, and the mud had dried. They rolled the first barrel out of the dam into sunlight.
Never thought I'd be happy to see these things again. They're just wood and water, but they saved our lives.
That's all they ever were. Wood, water, and a bit of physics. Nothing magical.
They brushed off the silt and reset the plugs, preparing the barrels for next winter's fire. The dog stretched in the warm grass, watching them work with the patience of an animal that trusted the spring.
The dugout's dry. No rot, no mold. It held against everything winter, threw at it.
He left the hide scraped back, and the cool air scrubbed the earth walls clean.
Next year, we should build a second dam farther up. just in case.
First things first, we've got a whole summer to plan.
The barrels sat in a row by the entrance, their shadows stretching long in the afternoon light. Weeks passed, and the riverbank forgot the ice. Wildflowers stitched the scars of the flood. Daniel walked the bank with his dog, the same path he'd dug in autumn, now soft with new growth.
The dugout looks like it belongs here now, like the hill grew around it on purpose.
The barrels stood in a patient row, their wood bleached pale by the sun, waiting for winter's call.
We survived the worst winter in memory and came out stronger. Not luck, preparation.
One barrel near the entrance had become a planter, wild asters rooted in the mud still clinging to its staves.
What kept us alive is now growing flowers. That's a good trade.
The dugout door stood open, a cool breath of earth drifting out, dry, safe, and ready for anything. And the river, once a threat, now ran shallow and clear, its voice a murmur instead of a roar. All that remained of the flood was the memory and the quiet proof sitting in the sun. Mark came down the green path, his stride easy, his eyes on the row of barrels drying in the sun.
I thought this was a wet grave, but my own warning made you build the dam. Your father froze with a stove full of wood. You swore it wouldn't happen again, and it didn't.
The doubt became the design. That's how it works sometimes.
They stood shoulder to shoulder, the river singing its spring song behind them. Mark's warning, once a wedge between them, was now the cornerstone of a hard-earned respect.
I'll never call anything a grave again without knowing what it might become.
And the barrel beside them, crowned with flowers, offered no argument. What had been buried in the dark was now out in the light, and the light was warm. Daniel stepped inside the dugout, the hide skinned back, spring light spilling across the clean earthen floor. The niches where the barrels had sat were dry and smooth, without a trace of mold or damp.
Not a single crack. The clay held. The drainage worked.
He ran his palm over the wall, feeling the cool, solid earth that had held back a flood.
This is what a home feels like. Not a gamble. A certainty.
He looked up at the empty niches, their rectangular shadows like shelves waiting for autumn.
We'll fill them again before the first snow, and they'll work just as well next year.
He sat on the cot, the silence comfortable and well-earned.
The water barrels saved us twice, and they'll save us again.
The lantern hung unlit. The day was warm enough, and the dugout needed no fire to prove its worth. Summer had fully claimed the riverbank. The grass stood tall, and the earth was warm. The barrels had been rolled into a neat row, their staves bleached white as driftwood. Daniel's dog chased a dragonfly, its paws kicking up petals from the asters by the entrance.
This is what we fought for. Not survival for its own sake, but mornings like this.
The dugout sat like a gentle hump in the landscape, its door wide open to the breeze. No trace remained of the flood, only the scoured stones that lined the bank like a memory. The barrel with flowers had become a landmark, a small monument to what water could do. Daniel leaned back on his hands, feeling the sun soak into his shoulders.
The river's low and friendly now, but we'll be ready when it turns again.
The story of the riverbank dugout had no ending because it was still being written, one season at a time. In the years that followed, the barrels sat by the dugout, never far from the door. Men had called it a fool's project, a wet grave waiting to swallow a stubborn man. But the water inside stored the sun's gift, returning it through the longest nights. And when the river swelled, the same barrels locked together, a dam built from dread. The mockery became the blueprint. The fear became the fortress. On hard winter evenings, neighbors spoke of the dugout that never froze. They remembered the man who buried science in the mud and saved them all. The barrels stayed, a sun-warmed teacher, wildflowers blooming at its base. And the river, once an enemy, ran clear, whispering the same secret: what we mock might save us. That was the lesson of the riverbank.